What's up, DC? This is your girl, Mindy Jo with the DCVoice.com. Day 2 for the Congressional Black Caucus Annual Legislative Conference 2018. We are here at the Convention Center. Yes, it's been going down. A lot's going on, many discussions, but we've chosen to select 2 panel discussions for today. The first one we're going to go to deals with black reporters reporting in an era of Trump. Well, in that case, you know, we've kind of been doing a great job at that. So we'll see what other reporters, what they have to say and their angles and approaches to delivering news in this era. Quite frankly, I'll just say this is a very dynamic time for news, for media in America, to really get your voice out, get that narrative out. So we'll see just kind of what are those journalists doing in this era. Not only a Trump era, but we also have an era of fake news too. So we have to see what strategies are they doing to combat fake news in this era. But we have a great show ahead. Tune in.
With Trump. And I was listening to what Shauna said, and there are things that you never hear. So I guess what I'm focusing on here is the space for black conservatives like me. Like where do I get my news from? Because I have to read the Wall Street Journal, I have to read everything to get, so if Shauna, you know, we're talking about the hundreds of millions of dollars in TRIO funding, we're talking about the opportunity zones that the administration is working on, we're talking about the Envision centers, the HUD Envision centers. These are the $300 million in HBCU loans that were forgiven.
So we got your question. Yeah, I'm not cutting you off because you're conservative, but we do have to wrap.
But I just wanted to know that you guys have any thoughts of where do I get my news from?
Okay.
I was wondering if you could shed some light from your side of the table around the conversation. It seems like news organizations are bending over backwards to print or report the word lie. We hear alternative facts and falsehoods. Is it the editor's desk that's stopping that word from being printed or reported?
Well, let me say this, words matter. The words are very heavy. It's taken a long time for me to say, I'm now saying they lie. But you have to, some things are an out and out lie. I just heard something crazy out there. So anyway, you know, but you have to wonder if Sarah Huckabee Sanders, when she comes to the podium, is she lying or does she know any information? Because sometimes she doesn't know things or she's given information that's wrong. Is she out that line? So sometimes you have to really wonder, but there are lies being told, especially when you catch them in lies. You know, when the president said about Michael Cohen, what was it he said? He didn't know anything about the payment on Air Force One. They go to find out on the tapes. Everybody tapes. I'm waiting for a Grammy or an American Music Award for some of those tapes. But no, but you heard him clearly understand what was going on. Yeah. So he out and out lied. So, I mean, you have to be careful when you put that word out. But I'm assigning it to him now. I'm assigning it. So, I mean, the news organizations, I mean, you know, Don Lemon will call it. Don Lemon's been calling him a liar for a long time. And I'm not mad at Don, but it took me a minute to come around. I'm like, okay, he's a liar. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. That was a lie. That was a lie. And then we found out he tried to photograph. He tried to edit it. That was a downright lie. Let me tell you something. Every year for inauguration, I have been privileged to be able to try to walk through the crowds, even though George W. Bush and Bill Clinton. It's hard to get around. But normally it takes you 15 minutes. It takes you an hour. I walked through those crowds with not a problem. I'm telling you, this last inauguration, it was interesting, and I'm like, it was nowhere near rock bottom. And that was one of the nails that nailed Sean's coffin shut when he came out in that ill-fitting suit screaming. He's a liar. Liar, pants on fire.
But first, I'll ask each of you to talk about what role you play in covering the current administration. So, Donna, well, I'll start with Jonathan, and we'll work our way down while you get situated. Jonathan.
Thank you, Cindy. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Thank you very much, Congresswoman, for having me on this panel, and haven't met all of my fellow panelists yet, but hi, nice to meet you, Steve. So I think of all the people on the panel, I'm the one who has the most distance from the day-to-day maelstrom that is the Trump White House. I'm on the editorial board of the Washington Post. I'm an opinion writer. I have a podcast. And after the election of President Trump and driving myself crazy with that election and what it meant, not just as an American, but as an African American, I actively took measures to put some distance between myself and him. I no longer jumped at writing pieces about the latest outrageous tweet because they were coming at, oh, I don't know, depending on whether it was cloudy, whether it was Saturday, whether he was angry, which seems to be all the time. And just decided to focus more on my podcast, which is once a week, and I deal with issues that are at the 38,000 foot level, so I can bring some context to what the hell is going on, as he would say. So and it's actually helped make me a more calm person, to not have to feel like I have to race towards every tweet, every outrageous thing that they do, so that when I do write something, I think it has a lot more power to it because I am not banging the drum every day, but when I do bang the drum, it's very, very loud. So that's what I do. That's the context of where I am in all of this. I am in awe of my colleagues who cover the White House, cover the agencies, cover this administration, and particularly this president, because it has been nonstop since June 16th, 2015.
I just want to add before we move on to Shauna that Jonathan also just recently launched a new show that's going to be airing between now and midterms, where he'll focus specifically on midterms. It's going to be with NPR, specifically WNYC out of New York, and even if you don't live in New York, you can catch it on multi-platforms. So if you follow Jonathan,
WNYC.org.
Yes.
You can live stream.
And if you follow Jonathan on Twitter, he tweets these things out. And if you have not had a chance to read one of my favorite pieces that he's written recently, the day after the Florida primary, the title of this piece was "Why Y'all So Surprised That Andrew Gillum Won?" So, yes, please, Shauna Thomas with Vice News.
Hey everybody, so as she said, I am the Washington DC Bureau Chief of Vice News. I have like 7 titles, but I'm Senior Producer of Vice News Tonight. That is our 5-night-a-week show on HBO, half-hour news program that is trying to do news a little bit differently. And as we shift down, people will get closer and closer to the White House. I am a little closer than Jonathan in that I run a team of about 14 people, 2 correspondents, 4 producers, other people who are trying to cover DC, but we're trying to cover it from different angles. We are trying to take a different way of looking at things. And so that if that means covering like what an agency is doing versus directly covering the White House, we do a lot more of that on our show and trying to figure out what actually sort of impacts people's lives on a larger basis. That doesn't mean I don't get all of President Trump's tweets as text messages. I do. Every morning, he's basically my alarm clock. He's very punctual. Around 5:36 a.m., the man starts tweeting. And so it is my job in some ways to be aware of all of that and then to make some very calculated decisions about what is worth being on our 24 to 28 minutes of news on HBO every day. This mandate is basically, if we can't add value and sort of give you a different way of looking at something, and that's because we sort of have this freedom because there are 24-hour news networks, because there is NBC, ABC, CBS, there's the Washington Post, there's the New York Times. We don't have 1,000 reporters, so we have to make decisions. But also, we are trying to get away from false equivalency. And I think there is this thing right now, or there has been this thing in political reporting where, okay, the Republican side says this, the Democratic side says this, you make a decision, and hopefully you have enough context to make that decision about the way you vote. And that's how I approach everything. Like, I want to inform people with enough information so that they can make smart decisions about voting and try to make it make them understand that what their government does affect their lives. So everything we do is sort of going towards that, in my opinion. Is very early on, one of my correspondents did a piece about government shutdowns. Don't mean to look at you right there, but government shutdowns. It's a thing we argue about every year, basically. And the piece was basically, it was really simple because I'm sort of obsessed with the appropriations process, which is, the piece was government shutdowns are dumb, and here's why they're dumb. And it does come off as an opinion, but it's an opinion that's based on these facts. Government shutdowns end up costing more than you save by shutting down the government. Because in the process of restarting the government, you end up paying people overtime. You end up having to you have to make up for so many things that you end up you taxpayer ends up paying more when they shut the government down because they don't like how the money is going to get spent. That is the kind of news I want to do and what we're trying to do at Vice News. So 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, HBO. If you have it, tune in. If you don't, borrow your cousin's aunt's ex-boyfriend's HBO Go account, which we all know that's what you're doing. And HBO knows too. But we just want eyeballs because we're trying to give you something different.
I never miss an episode. Shauna does amazing work. And I just want to add to Shauna, we all remember the amazing award-winning coverage that Shauna led in Charlottesville. Shauna oversaw all of that, so I just want to shout you out for that, and we'll talk about that later. So now we get to Alexi.
I sent that Charlottesville video to everyone at Axios, including the founders, and I was like, please watch this, and then let's discuss how we can do something even close to this level. It was so good at a time when I feel like everyone was like, what the heck is going on? You guys were the one place that came through and helped cut through the noise, so thank you for that. Axios is relatively new. We launched on Inauguration Day with an interview with President Trump, and I started there 4 months later in April of 2017. Our whole thing is trying to give you the facts you need to know without any opinions, because there's so much going on and you're hearing so much noise all the time that we really place value on facts and words that matter. Sometimes that feels like we're not doing enough, right? Like sometimes my person, who I am, feels attacked by what's going on in the administration here in DC, and I'm not allowed to talk about that in my writing, and I think that's okay. But we really try to give people all the information, sort of like Shauna was saying, to make the most well-informed decision for themselves. I cover the 2018 midterms for Axios, and when they told me I would cover that beat, I was like, oh, this is amazing. I can never look at a Trump tweet again. That was the dumbest thing I could have thought. I was like, oh, Trump, midterms, totally unrelated, it's fine. And now all of my stories are like, this Republican is the most Trump-like candidate, and that's the reason he won. We don't know what issues he's running on, but we know he wants to be like President Trump, so that's why he won. Or President Trump didn't endorse this person who was an incumbent, therefore they lost and are now out of a job. Like, that is insane. And that is a lot of what my coverage is looking at Trump's tweets, his endorsements, the way that he is playing in these primaries in a way that presidents haven't, not necessarily by raising money, but just by inserting himself physically and digitally into these races so that his mark is left on the Republican Party and he continues to change the Republican Party, whether or not he's on the ballot in 2018. So that's a lot of my focus and a lot of the way that I cover the administration. And then, of course, there are different things, like things that are coming out of Trump's mouth or from the administration, whether it's policies or statements, especially trade is a big deal that's affecting places where the president relied on those folks to vote for him in 2016, and now they're worried with the trade policies that they're going to be affected negatively and maybe not vote for the president's pick in the Republican primary or the election in November. So I don't have to keep up with everything coming out of the White House every day unless it relates directly to the midterms. That is a lot more than I anticipated. And then, of course, when I'm on TV, anything goes, so I'm stuck kind of talking about anything that he says and does and comes out of the White House.
So I just want to say about Alexi, there are not a lot of faces that look like ours at Axios. And I'm thrilled to see Alexi there. I'm thrilled to see her every time she's on television, and I hope that you all will follow her work so you can show Axios it matters when there's a face that looks like ours covering this administration and covering midterms. So thank you, Alexi, for being the owner. Have your back. Christine with Glamour.
Yes. So actually, can we go get a drink after the midterms, because I am exhausted.
So my name is Christina Coleman. I am currently the News and Culture Director at Glamour Magazine. Really new position. Actually, you guys shouted me out on the beat, so thank you very much for that position. So I'm coming from Essence. So for the past 2 years under this Trump administration, I have worked with women's brands, and so we take some liberty in knowing that our audience are primarily women. At Essence, it was women of color. Donna was one of my fantastic reporters who really got the job done. And we explained the news. So an example would be, and not under Essence I did this, but under Glamour, Brett Kavanaugh's, confirmation, maybe not confirmation, I don't know yet. But how would that affect Black women, right? We know that we're dealing with the maternal mortality crisis, and a rollback of Roe v. Wade or defunding Planned Parenthood would affect Black women tremendously. So that's how we would find our way into the news and cover Trump. So we're not covering this every 2 weeks. I have to turn notifications off. I am tired, y'all. I am tired. I am so tired. But and so I'm really blessed to be in a position where I can talk to women. In my new role, I've taken some liberty as well in telling stories that are important to Black women. I am first a Black woman. Then I am an editor and a director, right? And when we talk about hostile environments, typically when you're a Black person in a white space, it can be a hostile environment because you can often be told that your stories don't matter. And so I feel like it's my role to make sure, as a director, I'm not really writing as much anymore, I'm editing, is to make sure that those stories are being told and that I'm advocating and fighting for them. That is my job, to fight for those stories in newsrooms where you're being told that doesn't matter or that's not dynamic enough. Because that does happen, absolutely happen.
Hi, everybody. I'm Donna Marie Owens. So, one of the things that's really unique about me is that I'm one of the rare reporters in the United States who does not tweet. I'm not on Facebook. I made an early decision. I'm old school. April and I are friends. I'm of a certain age, as they say. And so I just made a decision that my work would speak for itself. I have contracts with NBC, Essence, NPR, Reuters. I have not had a byline in 25 years. But because I'm not, social media, I want my work to speak for itself, and so it does. And so my editors know that. So I'm actually, I do a lot of writing for Essence. Christina was my dear editor, and she left recently to go to Glamour. But I've had a lot of experience covering the White House, Congress. I covered the Obama years. I've covered Trump. I remember that I was one of the few African American women in the room when Ben Carson was sworn in. That was a very interesting experience. And I'm from Baltimore, so I knew Dr. Carson prior to his political career. But at any rate, one of the things that I've just kind of noticed about the administration, and that I've made sort of a conscious effort with, is that I am trying to be fair and balanced. I don't put my personal opinions in my pieces. I just don't. I'm not that kind of reporter. I'm very old school, and I do try to get both sides. And sometimes people are like, "Wow, you spoke to a Republican, or you spoke to a Black Republican." After the Trump inauguration, I made a conscious effort to try to go find African American Republicans. I wanted to know, why are you supporting this particular candidate? It wasn't my view. I wanted to hear their views. Some of them have since, gone way underground, and you can't find them. But others, get back to me, and some still very much support him. I just finished working on a piece for Essence. I can't get too deep into it, but I spoke with the RNC, and they have a director of African American engagement, and they say they are courting Black voters. So I try to be balanced and I try to be fair, but certainly we're human, and so when you go in these rooms, as Christina said, you are who you are, and you bring with you your experiences and all of who you are. In my mind, without getting too deep here, I'm a deeply spiritual person, and so I look at our nation and what we're going through right now in a very sort of spiritual sense, and I feel that we will be okay. I feel that African Americans will be okay because we are resilient, phenomenal people. Our ancestors and our DNA helped build this country with our blood and our sweat and our tears, and we're not going anywhere, and we are not going anywhere as members of the press. So that's my spiel for now. Okay.
Thank you. a quick moment for the audience to see this panel, because these are all different people with different perspectives, with different responsibilities in covering this administration, but you will never see a panel like this on most cable TV news networks, with the exception of Joy Reid, right, Jonathan?
Right, I was about to say, don't forget
With the
about
exception of Joy, which is why we love Joy. But even though we would all bring different things to the discussion, and nobody would think if this was a panel full of white people, no one would think to have all of them on a panel discussion on cable news. That happens all the time. But with us, it's like, well, we can't have a Shauna Thomas, a Jonathan Capehart, and a Leslie. That wouldn't make any sense. But as you see today, and as you'll see as we get into the discussion, it completely would. So on that note, I want to ask all of you, and some of you spoke about it a little bit, so I'm just going to throw this to the panel, to whoever wants to take it. In covering this administration, you are all reporters first. I mean, that's what you're trained to do. This administration is unique because race is playing a pivotal role in midterms, politics, policy, etc. Do you show up as a reporter, or do you show up as a black person who happens to be a reporter? And that's to anybody who wants to tackle it.
I'll jump in since I'm the opinion writer. So a lot of people don't think that opinion writers are reporters or journalists. I spend a lot of time, if you follow me on Twitter, correcting people. No, I am a journalist, I am a reporter. The luxury that I have is once I do my reporting, I get to say what I think. I get to say who I think is right, who I think is wrong, and I get to, in writing under my own name, I get to call people out. And so I've been calling Donald Trump out since he was a candidate. When I was uncomfortable saying it on television, when I would couch it by saying, you know, he's run the most racist, xenophobic, misogynistic, nativist campaign we've seen in a long time, and he has destroyed American political discourse. There's a little bit of distance there. Now, especially after Charlottesville, flat out, he's a racist. And I have no shame in saying it. I have no, apprehension like I used to. Because as a journalist, I think in the last panel with April, someone asked a question about, why don't reporters say that he lies? And April said words matter, and they do, because for journalists to say that the leader of the country is lying, you have got to have the evidence. And President Trump has given us the evidence, again, since June 16th, 2015. And so one of the last pieces I wrote says, yes, Donald Trump, you are racist. And then I ran through all of the evidence, because when I'm writing my opinion pieces, I've never gone to law school, but when I write, I kind of feel like I'm writing a brief, because I'm anticipating either the Trump supporters or the people who want to come after me to say, how dare you say that, where's your evidence? And I put it out there, here's what he said. Oh, you don't believe that he said it? Here's the hyperlink. Click on the hyperlink, and you can see what he says. All of that to say is, because I'm an opinion writer, and that's been my entire career. I have never been, that's not true. I spent 10 months trying to be a news side journalist like these four, and failed miserably and ran right back to opinion writing. So my entire career has been in opinion writing, and when you're an opinion writer, you bring your entire self to the table. When I was at the Daily News on the editorial board, I was there as a man, a black man, first closeted to my editor, and then openly gay man to the table. All of those identities inform the way I view the world. And so now, many years since those Daily News time, I got a lot of experience under my belt where I look at what's happening, and now what I'm bringing to the table is, I'm an American. This is my country. And it is an affront to me as an American to see what is happening to our institutions, to the presidency, and especially coming after 8 years of the dignified presidency of Barack Obama. Please name one scandal. Name one.
The tan suit.
Okay, and you know what?
That's the curious.
The beer summit. And you know
The
what?
beer summit and the tan suit,
Well,
they
the
said,
tan
y'all have heard.
suit, I I piled on that, but that was just fun. That was just for fun. We're not talking about conspiracy with the Russians, putting in unqualified people. So it is very important to me that when I write about the administration, and I write about Charlottesville, and I write about his constant use of the pejorative Pocahontas, when talking about Elizabeth Warren, when he said that in front of Native American code talkers with a portrait of Andrew Jackson laying down for them, that's when I feel it is incumbent upon me. That's when I climb down out of my ivory tower and say, you are a racist.
You know what's interesting? I mean, so many things that you said that I would love to talk about forever, like the fact that if more white journalists were willing to say that, it's not like we are the only ones who can see racism and find evidence of racism, but it's more loaded, I think, to a lot of people as black journalists, if we come out and say that, because I approach situations as a reporter first, even though my identity shapes a lot of the way I think and the things I want to write about, and that comes through when I'm pitching stories about black folks running for office or things that are affecting the black community to my editor. But I try to approach situations as a reporter first, but I'm learning more and more, especially when you go on TV, that like people see me as a black woman first, and I don't even know if they know I'm a reporter half the time. And I was on TV with Michelle Sindor 2 days ago, and I was picked up by like a conservative podcaster who somehow like stretched his brain far enough to figure out how to twist something totally benign I said into me not being a feminist. And I was like, that's ridiculous. And all the comments are suddenly you people, these people, those people. We are like further and further away from ourselves, Misha and I, because we were two black women on a panel, and because people aren't used to seeing that, because we're sitting next to a woman who happens to be white, right? And so that contrast is too stark for people to get past. To think about she's a reporter, let's think about the way she's answering this question and the context that she's providing. Instead, they think she's a black woman, that's a political statement, that influences what she's saying, no matter what she's saying, even if it's totally in the middle and objective. And that's something that's hard to deal with when you realize that more and more, but then it also goes to something you were saying earlier about Twitter, and I think how I can't put too much stock into that sort of discussion online, because I hope that's not how people actually think, but I am worried that people are increasingly unable to see past your external identity and appearance and get to what it is you're actually saying, to even if it challenges something that they think in any respect.
So I feel a little differently about this. First, no one ever asks black journalists this question, which is, it's crazy. No one ever says, are you white first? And so I find it offensive that we even have to, address this, but I do very much show up as a black woman first. And I do so because I have been in spaces where I've been told when I try to, maybe implement a beat about diversity or race, that we shouldn't do that. We don't have to really address it head on. It can be subtle. We can infuse it in our reporting. We can, when you think about a story, but make sure you think about people of color. That's lip service, and what ends up happening is that it doesn't happen at all. And so I carry my blackness like a badge, very proudly, and I show up every day as a black woman first because I know what can happen when I walk into space and I say I'm a journalist, because that is code for white. That can be code for the status quo. And what I'm trying to do in the spaces that I'm very, very lucky and blessed to be in is push up against that. And so I do show up as a black woman first and foremost.
Oh, hi. Okay.
Anybody can jump in.
Okay. I don't know. I've never really even thought about that question that deeply because, as Christina noted, it's not a question that others are asked typically. But I will give you an anecdote that I found really interesting. I've been a reporter for a long time and have reporter friends, a lot of reporter friends, black, white, old, young, etc. And one of my older white male reporters, we were chatting one day and I said, are you covering CBC? And he said, CBC? Like, what? And major network, and he was just like, CBC? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, oh no, my editors are not, going to want that. And I was just like, okay. And so we had a discussion about it, and I said, can you push back? And, it was clear to me that he didn't particularly want to push back, and clearly his editors didn't want to push back. And this is something that reporters of color, black reporters, face in newsrooms every single day. I cannot tell you the times I've practically begged some of my editors to cover certain stories with the CBC, the black women in Congress, and frankly, sometimes you have to beg some of your black editors. It's like people don't get it. And it's this very interesting sort of dichotomy because, on the one hand, you're saying to your editor, okay, I am wanting to cover race-based news, but at the same time, you want to be thought of as a reporter who can cover anything. I can cover anything. I can cover energy. I can cover travel. I can cover whatever I want to cover. I've got a master's degree from Columbia Journalism School. It cost me a lot of money, so that I can cover whatever I want to cover. But I choose at this stage of my career, I like to cover race. I like to cover women's issues. I like to talk about these important seminal issues that are shaping our nation right now. So,
Anybody else?
Yeah, I think, much like Lexi, I do think I consider myself a reporter first who is not going to check my blackness when thinking about questions and story ideas. So when I talk about appropriations or my other obsession, which is Guantanamo Bay, is there a way that my blackness can inform a question about that? I don't know with Guantanamo Bay, but that doesn't mean I'm not thinking about that. I think the other thing that I make sure to do is I think on my show's management team, I am the only black person on my show's management team, and so when there are other stories that my team is not necessarily doing, but do relate to race and do relate to the black community, and we do a lot of those stories. There's a lot of times where I step in and I'm like, hey, can I read that script? Just let's just take a check for a second. That doesn't mean I'm going to change the script. Doesn't even mean I'm going to talk to the correspondent. I may talk to the other senior producer in charge of that piece. But let's make sure that we are thinking about these things from multiple angles, and that something isn't getting missed or something isn't offensive that doesn't necessarily have to be offensive, because the story might really be good, but this line, if you heard it from a different angle, if you heard it from a different point of view, you would question the entire piece. So I think that is the responsibility that I've taken on, and I think that's important. I think I took that responsibility on. I used to be the senior producer of Meet the Press, and would, in that situation, definitely try to pitch more stories that affect the minority community, or make sure we have minorities on, or just something just as simple as, I will say, we had a formula for our panel in Meet the Press, which was, we were never going to do a panel with 4 white people. It was never going to happen. We were never going to do a panel that was all men, and that was from Chuck Todd on down. Never. Now, there were some higher up people who wanted to change those rules that we had put in place, but we were just never going to do that, because it would not have been, and it's already not representative because Meet the Press is elite, and I get it and all that, but we were never not going to try to be somewhat representative of what this country looks like when having a conversation on a platform that is that big.
That is so important that you said you will check a script, you will check the story.
Yeah, it's a
But
big deal.
boy, does it get exhausting when they come to you and are like, this is black.
Yeah.
I am not a teacher. I have lessons all day, every day. But it's so important. It's a responsibility that we hold, and I think everyone on this panel probably, and
Yeah. I want to share I apologize for saying it. I want to share a funny little incident. Well, it's not funny actually, but so I covered the Freddie Gray case for Reuters extensively for 2.5 years. And Reuters refused to use the term African American. And so, I went to my editor one day and I said, can we please use, they kept saying black, and it was lowercase. And it was, and the young black man, Freddie Gray, the young black, and the black. And I was just like, and I would put African American in my copy. And then, sure enough, I'd see my piece, and there it would be black. And so I was just like, this struck me. So I went to my editor, and I'm like, I'm not confrontational about these kinds of things, unless I have to be. And I said, the standard, everybody's using AP style, African American. He's like, well, because we have a global audience, they're not necessarily African American. They may be in Africa, or they may be, in the Caribbean. So I had to kind of accept that answer with some side eyes. I was like, okay, so we're gonna not use African American. But those are just some of the examples of the struggles and the fight that you sometimes face in these newsrooms. Every single day with the smallest of things. It can be exhausting.
And I would like to argue that's why newsroom diversity. Just you, Donna, having that conversation with somebody, and all of you really, you're, hundreds of thousands of people are reading your work every day. So those conversations do cast a wide net of influence, and so we all thank you for that.
One thing, Reuters is not an American company, right?
Exactly.
So that's the other thing that plays into.
Yeah.
So I'm curious for each of you, your experience with your publication. The press is under an unprecedented and unpresidential attack these days. And I remember after the inauguration, some reality TV show, I think it was one of the Real Housewives franchise, had come out that they had staged some work or something. And in all of my feeds, I have a very eclectic group of people, a very eclectic family members. I'm not the only one in this room, with family members who don't necessarily pay attention to politics. And I remember that was like in my feed. Not a lot of political, not a lot of like the world is on fire, but like, oh my God, did you guys hear that the Real Housewives is, staging TV lines? And I just thought the biggest reality show that actually matters just kicked off season 1, and it is scary times. And I remember thinking, what is happening that people are not consuming news that matters? What is happening that people aren't paying attention? And I think that's how we got in this space to begin with. As we're navigating this space, and as you all are trying to be the bullhorn to say, hey everybody, this is what's going on, and as you're doing that while being under attack, have you found that your audiences have been receptive, or have you still struggled to get your work in front of people's eyes? And I know TV is a little different from print, but I'm curious to hear from all of you how receptive audiences have been in news consumption.
News consumption is up. The strange benefit of President Trump is that people are interested in news. Now, some of that, like you using the reality TV idea, is because it does feel like reality TV, and that's because President Trump understands the media. He gets it. That's part of why he won the election.
And Russia.
We will see. Maybe Paul Manafort will have something to tell Robert Mueller after today. But because there is such an interest, and I think from a liberal point of view, there's an interest in how did that guy get there? And I think from the conservative point of view, they're fascinated with him, and he controls in some ways the keys to the kingdom. There are a lot of people paying attention. There are a lot of jobs. There's an open job at vicenews.com for a political reporter out of my office, and I sent it to an email list I have of women journalists in DC. And the responses I got back were not, I'm interested in the job. It was other women who are in higher level positions being like, I've got 3 jobs over here. I've got 2. Because the money is coming in a way that allows us to cover more. And I don't know if it really is just a Trump bubble and people won't care after Trump. I hope that is not true. Whether after Trump is 2 years, 4 years, 8 years, whatever happens, I don't know. But there is an interest in it.
Anybody else?
I can jump in. I think that at the Washington Post, 2 great things happened almost at the same time.
Hashtag Bezos.
Well, that's the first great one.
Amazon.
So when Don Graham and the Graham family sold the Washington Post, they really loved that paper. And I knew once I got over the shock that they sold the paper, I then came to the second realization that Don Graham was not going to sell the paper to just anybody. He was going to sell it to someone who revered the institution of journalism and revered the institution that is the Washington Post. Enter Jeff Bezos. He bought it for, I think it was $150 million of his own money. It's sort of the equivalent of us walking into, I don't know, H&M or Zara or Uniqlo and buying and splurging. He then comes in and just hurls money at the place and says, we're all about delivering news to the consumer do what you need to do to do it. The paper had been cut so much, because it was at the time a publicly traded company, that we were a bare bones operation. Now, actually today, Jeff Bezos is in town. He cut the ribbon on our 6th floor. We've now expanded to the entire 6th floor of the building we moved to 2 years ago, because we outgrew the space that we moved into 2 years ago. We got all these new desks and new people. The other great thing, in quotes, that happened was the election of Donald Trump. And so you have the paper hiring more people, one, because it could, but also out of necessity to cover an administration unlike any other that we've seen. And from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think when Trump was inaugurated, the New York Times put their White House beat is now a 24/7 beat, where they've got someone who is overnight watching the Twitter feed just in case the president does something. And we saw a few weeks ago, 1 in the morning was all uppercase, witch hunt, no collusion. I mean, unfortunately, that's a story. But in terms of your question about my audience in particular, I know is very receptive to whatever it is I'm going to write about whatever. One of the things in this whirlwind, can't even call it a news cycle anymore, because there aren't any cycles. I know that if something happens today, I know that my audience, because they're just inundated with so much news, and maybe you all have seen this as well, that I could wait 3 days to write a piece about what we've just been through, and it won't be old, because everyone is looking to put the news that they've heard or watched or listened to, put it into context. They're looking to me, they're looking to all of us, like, okay, I want to know what Christina has to say about this thing that happened. Or I want to know what Jonathan has to say about this thing that happened. Yeah, it happened 2 days ago, but he or she writes in such a way that helps me understand. And so for me, that's now my guiding principle. What's happened? Does it rise to the level that I want to spend an extra few hours to write a piece in order for my audience to better understand what's happening?
Thank you for that. And I know the audience may have questions, so I'm going to ask one question while you gather your thoughts. Oh, well, maybe I'll hold my question since there are so many hands in the air. Oh, yeah. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Just to talk about it from a women's brand perspective, so when I got to Essence, there was not a news vertical. They talked about news, but there wasn't a designated news vertical, so it was up to me to build that out. It was August, and the presidential election was just a few months later, and it was insane that we didn't have anything, so we had to build that from the ground up. What we found is that people wanted to consume that news, and traffic grew tremendously, like historically at Essence, on Essence.com. What happened the following January was that traffic dipped because people were fatigued. They did not want to hear about Trump's every move. They did not want to see his tweets. And quite frankly, because Essence is a Black publication, there was some trauma surrounding the presidential election, and because we knew exactly what was going to happen. Come on, and we were looking at everybody else like we didn't want to hear that, and so news did take a dip. At Glimmer, it was kind of the same thing, and I find that in particular for women's brands, it's important to have perspective and try to approach it from a different angle. So when we talk about migrant children being separated from their parents, we're not necessarily talking about Donald Trump, but we are going to border cities. We went to San Diego and talked to some mothers who were seeking asylum, right? That was our way in to talk about children. Right now we're working on a piece about the trauma. Even though that story is not in the news the way that it was a couple of months ago, it's still very important to discuss it in a way that people know it's happening and that who's behind it, right?
Right.
And so we've had to get creative in making sure that the news gets to women, especially women of color, in a way that doesn't trigger them, in a way that's not going to push them away, because we understand the fatigue is real. And if we are experiencing, I think we've all kind of experienced a little bit of that, not a lot of it, a lot of it. Then you can imagine with someone who's not a journalist, this isn't their job. I'm sure they're turning off television.
So Lewis, front page editor of Huffington Post. I'm just curious because you just talked about trauma and fatigue. What do you all do as far as like self-care? I mean, I look like the news cycle has hit me, you know. So, I mean, what are your tips for self-care? What do you all do?
What's that? I'm taking suggestions. Would love. Like, I don't know.
Phil, so I have to tell you, you know, a 17-hour day is not a rarity for me. Christina and some of my other editors know Joe Madison
Donna needs a break.
Joe Madison back there is my former Ebony editor, giving him a shout out. He's an amazing editor. Seriously, I'm up about 4 or 5 in the morning, and I'm looking through emails, and I'm starting, you know, my day, and then there's the research and the writing, and then if you've got to travel, I mean, you know, Essence sent me to Georgia to interview Stacey Abrams. When Kamala Harris was running for Senate, they flew me to Los Angeles. So, I mean, you know, you've got a schedule, you've got a lot to do. And so, you know, I am somebody, you know, who believes in working hard and playing hard. And, you know, I won't get into all the details, but, you know, I'm not going to, you know, sacrifice whom I am and my soul for a job, because this is a job. It is a mission as well. But we have to be very clear, it is a job. I believe in the mission of journalism. And I spend a 17-hour day, and there's some Sundays I jump up, I go to church, I may do brunch, I may catch up with friends, but then I'm writing, you know? I mean, it's hard work. It's really, 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 really hard work being a journalist. That's why I let younger aspiring reporters know, like, don't try to get into this for the quote-unquote glamour. You're in the wrong industry, okay? When you're sitting in front of that screen and have to fill it with 2,000 words, there's nothing glamorous about that.
Right. And
Okay,
that you've got 30 minutes to do it.
That's right. Okay.
I turned off. The only notifications I have on my phone are breaking news from the Post, Times, and the Wall Street Journal, and that's it. I take time for myself. On the weekends, I go for a long walk or a long run. I listen to music. I started reading. All I did for years was read newspapers. That's all I ever did was read newspapers. And now I go and I just get books and not fiction, historical novels, biographies and things like that. I finished a big biography of Harriet Tubman, and then I was like, oh, there's this book called The Underground Railroad. That'd be perfect. I grabbed that, didn't realize it was fiction, but I just finished that yesterday. And it was superb, and it's just a way to pull back and understand that this is a crazy time, and that you will drive yourself crazy if you let it. And so you have to push back very hard. And in reading the biography of Harriet Tubman and finishing Underground Railroad and the other books that I've read, Donna Brazil's book with Mignon Moore and Leah Daughtry and Yolanda Caraway for colored girls who considered going into politics, what those books have shown me is that as crazy as this time is, it has totally put into perspective for me what's happening, which has actually calmed me down. Because I think it was Donna who said earlier that we as a country and we as a people have been through a lot. And we will get through this. And so being able to step outside and read other people's trials and tribulations and how they overcame has been very helpful for me.
Sometimes we are, by our bosses, are sort of faced with the challenge of, or they want us to sort of, I'm thinking specifically about Unite the Right. When covering those instances, sometimes we have to put in a position of legitimizing certain perspectives, certain views as equal to another, right? So Jason Kessler is not sort of equivalent to Black Lives Matter calling for people to recognize Black humanity. Yet, often, in 2 minutes, we have to present two sides as if they are equal when they are not. And that is sort of a challenge that I've faced throughout my career, that that often, there's just this constant false equivalence in the, under the guise of being fair. And yeah, so I wonder how do you balance that? When do you push back? When do you realize, okay, that's not a battle worth fighting, just gotta do what I gotta do? Yeah, would love to feedback.
I mean, I think it involves conversations within news organizations about what does that news organization as a whole want to stand for. And I think that what Charlottesville sort of did was force a lot of news organizations, and I'm sure that conversation's been happening for years and years and years, but it forced a lot of people to have this very specific conversation about, okay, those two sides were not the same. And it has to be okay to say that. And I luckily work for a news organization where we can be like, those people are racist, those people died. Like, it's not the same. That doesn't mean, though, and Vice News did sort of like, on the tail end of all the coverage around Charlottesville in our episode coming out, we did start to get a weird backlash that happened about us, but by focusing on the alt-right side of it the way we did, that we helped legitimize them. And I would push back on that. One, I think we didn't have to play false equivalency, but we also didn't necessarily need to ignore something that happened. And what was behind that movement, the fact that people were willing to march in the streets without hoods, and how did we get to that point? And our reporter who was on that story has been covering the alt-right for years, has been, before she came to Vice, had been attacked on Reddit and 4chan and everything. But they have a weird respect for her because she keeps covering it. So we used that because she had those contacts to tell a story about them. It's not legitimizing them, but we can't pretend like things don't exist, and that makes it okay to cover it. But I think it's an internal conversation that has to happen. Like, do you want to play both sides? And if so, why? And then you have to make a decision about, is that where you want to work? Or is it okay to say, those are racists, and this is not, but here's how we got